The dust has settled on the first day of the legal tampering period. What prize did your team earn? Plus, there's still plenty of options still up for bid, but you've got to act quick. We've got it all here on the Grey Duck NFL Show. Hello and welcome once again to the Grey Duck NFL Show, where we are back after a brief hiatus of a couple of weeks, took a little break after the Super Bowl, and got our ducks in a row. And now the next season is basically underway. The starting gates here with the new league year for 2026, and free agency went through those starting gates today. It was the first day of the legal tampering period, which we mentioned at the top of the show, meaning that agents can begin speaking to NFL teams as if they weren't already. I think that's probably the worst kept secret in all of the NFL, is that all of these conversations have been going on since basically the end of the Super Bowl, and certainly have been going on since the Combine at the very least. But these are when those moves can be made official. Players, I think there was a new rule instilled that players could have a Zoom call with the team for a certain amount of time, but each team was limited to 5 of those guys. So I don't know how much that affected anyone's final decision, but it was a new rule put in place for this legal tampering period, which I think is now officially called the negotiating window, because legal tampering is kind of a weird oxymoronic term in the first place. But there was plenty going on today on the first day of free agency. I think the last 2 years I remember mostly because I was really excited about what the Minnesota Vikings were going to do, both during the 2024 free agency and 2025 free agency. They had cap space in both of those years and could really make a splash. In those years, I remember the first half hour, things kind of trickled out. And that was a little bit different than what it was in prior years, where at noon Eastern time, 9 o'clock Arizona time, you've got everything coming off the market just like that, one right after another. 2024 and 2025, that certainly slowed down, but I think it returned today because it was a constant refreshing of the Twitter timeline or the Blue Sky timeline or wherever it was that you were getting your news for free agency. It was a constant pull down. Did anything else go through? Did anyone sign another big star? Well, we've got all of the stars. We've got all of the moves here, and we'll go through it with you here on the Grey Duck NFL Show. We'll go and give you a number of winners that I have from the first day of free agency. I've got 7 winners and 4 losers. And then the players that were not mentioned during the winners and losers segment that are going to make a big impact regardless moving forward, I will also talk about. And we will end the show by going through the best available free agent options going in to the second day of the legal tampering period. And then obviously on Wednesday is when those signings all can become official. And I'll also give you, based on the top options that are still available for Tuesday, my predictions on where those guys go based on today's moves, based on the cap space that some of these teams have left, and based on the needs of each and every team. But first, before we get into free agency, it should be worth noting that 2 of the biggest moves that will happen this offseason probably happened before the legal tampering period opened, and one of those was Maxx Crosby going to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks, including the number 14 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft next month. So, Baltimore making a big swing. And for the first time since they moved from Cleveland, they will not have a first-round pick in the NFL Draft. They've had a first-round pick in every single year since moving from Cleveland to Baltimore until this year. But now they have a big-time edge rusher who is excellent against the run, who is excellent against the pass, rushing the passer, I should say, and can really make a mark on a Ravens defense that really fell off a cliff last year and needed some parts in, parts out. Needed to make a trade of one of their top edge rushers to bring in a free safety so that Kyle Hamilton could go back into the box and play where he was the strongest and shore up a run defense that was not great at that point of the season. And they were kind of piecing it together with duct tape and bubble gum. And we're depending on, I think, their first-round safety to make a bigger impact than he did. Malachi Starks, I didn't hear much of his name or see much of him on the field throughout his first season, so that obviously could be a little bit concerning, but now they have a defensive star. And obviously, Nnamdi Madubuike was also out for the entirety of last season. Kyle Van Noy was good, but he was not the player that the Ravens needed, the splash player that the Ravens needed, and now they have that. Still not sure if Nnamdi Madubuike is coming back, but if he does, that is a very formidable defensive line. Travis Jones on there has already made that defensive line at the very least pretty good, so signing him to an extension before free agency even got started, I think even back during while the playoffs were still going on is when he signed his extension, or maybe even into the regular season. But he's going to be your run stopper. You're going to have Kyle Hamilton flying through the box. You're hoping that Malachi Starks, I guess, can play a big role for you. And then, of course, on third and long, you're going to let Maxx Crosby pin his ears back and go after the opposing passers in the AFC North Conference, most of which aren't very mobile. You know, Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, if he's back, I guess he's not yet. And Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel are not the most threatening out of the pocket passers. So if Maxx Crosby is able to consistently get them out of the pocket, that is going to bode well for Baltimore in both the short term and the long term. Obviously, you're going to miss out on a prospect in the 2026 draft that would have been a top 15 player, but the Ravens draft picks the last couple of years have been kind of hit or miss. Like Rashad Bateman has been a solid player, but he hasn't been an exceptional player. He's been a very reliable wide receiver, but he hasn't been the big-time playmaker that they expected when they drafted him out of Minnesota. We already mentioned Malachi Starks. I think Nate Wiggins took a second to get going, but he might, have arrived as a good cornerback, but still not up to the level that I think he was advertised for in that 2024 NFL draft. He was my top corner. All I saw was sticky coverage time and time again, and I have not seen that as much here at the NFL level. So I don't think you're going to be missing much with the draft capital. I love this move for the Ravens, and I like it for the Raiders as well, because the Raiders, as we'll discuss, made some big moves in free agency. They have a ton of cap space, and that is going to allow you not only to just pour a lot of money into the free agent market, but it allows you to kind of intelligently structure contracts in ways that kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. So one guy maybe you give a lot more money to here in this first year of free agency, and then based on the structure in the second and third years, that cap hit is a little bit lower, or vice versa. And you kind of match all of that up so that you can stay pretty even throughout the, typical 3 years where most of these free agent contracts kind of run through. It's not just what a lot of teams have done, which is a light cap hit in the first year, and then for every player, and then it continues to crescendo until now you've got a lot of just dead cap space on your books. The Raiders can structure those contracts a lot easier, so they have flexibility not only this year but next year as well. Now they have 2 first-round picks in both this year and next year. Fernando Mendoza is obviously going to be one of those picks with number 1, and then they're going to have a lot of different options, I think, based on who they come out of free agency with, and they've already got a boatload of players that I think are going to have a major impact next season, but they can still make some more splash plays, and then they can kind of go BPA if you have a lot of your needs maybe not met with elite players, but at least met to a point of being better than they were last year, where last year the offensive line without Colton Miller was really, really bad and made the offense unwatchable, unmovable. Ashton Genty couldn't get anything going. Geno Smith was pressured on every single drop back and eventually just kind of fell apart both physically and mentally as a quarterback. And reverted all the way back to when he was with the New York Jets and made turnovers left and right, was not the same guy that he was in Seattle, and part of that is probably the aging process, but a lot of that is also what was around him, and you don't want to put Fernando Mendoza in a place where that can unravel him in his first season in the NFL. So they are giving themselves ammo, both with veterans in free agency for the next couple of years, and now with a plethora of draft capital. I believe it's 3 picks in the top 36. So, I mean, almost 3 first-round picks just based on where the Raiders are already drafting with their second-round pick. They're going to have a lot of options. They're going to have their pick of the litter for the most part. And we'll talk about some of their signings here because it already looks like this team is going to turn the corner. And I think the rebuild is going to go pretty well for John Spytek, Tom Brady, and company. Now, moving on to the other big trade that happened. And there were a couple of other big trades as well, like Garrett Bradbury to the Chicago Bears after Drew Dahlman retired. And then we'll also talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick today before free agency started in the morning. He got traded from Miami to the New York Jets. But the big one, obviously, that included the first-round picks was the Trent McDuffie to the Los Angeles Rams, and that is Kansas City receiving the lower of the LA Rams first-round picks and sending Trent McDuffie to the LA Rams. And, you know, again, this is a move that I like from both sides to a point. I mean, I certainly like it more for the Los Angeles Rams because of how they were able to swindle the Atlanta Falcons out of a first-round pick last year and kind of add to their arsenal this year. So the Rams are already going to be using the Falcons pick, I believe at number 13 in this upcoming NFL draft. So they were kind of already rolling with house money. And we talked about it after the NFC Championship game, that the biggest need that needed to be addressed by the Rams this offseason was a secondary that had been kind of shattered. And became even more so shattered when Darius Williams retired a couple of days ago. And not as if Darius Williams at this stage in his career had been a super reliable defensive back, but he was a guy that was familiar with the system and that was at the very least somewhat salvageable. Even though in the NFC Championship game he did obviously get burned by Rashid Shaheed, and that kind of set up how the rest of the game played out. So they needed to address their secondary because their defensive line is elite and it has 6 players that can rotate in and out and 6 players that would probably be starters on every other team or most of the teams in the NFL. And it had a revelation in linebacker this year with Nate Landman making plays every single week. It seemed like every single time I was watching a Rams game on either live or in the NFL replay, the condensed replay, Nate Landman was punching a football out or recovering a football. Like dude must have had like 16 forced fumbles. That's what it seemed like. It seemed like every single game he was punching the ball out of the opponent's hands. And I think that was literally true for the first 3 or 4 games of the season where he just continued to make those plays. So they had those first 2 levels addressed, and even some of their safeties have been good. They brought back Cam Curl, and a lot of their defensive backs were going to hit free agency in the first place anyway. But they re-signed Cam Curl. They bring back Quentin Lake, their nickel corner, their nickel safety. And now they bring in Trent McDuffie, who has shown himself to be versatile both in the slot and on the outside. Much better in the slot, but still plays at a very high level on the outside as well. So they are able to address a significant need with a known commodity rather than having to, with either pick number 13 or pick number 29, regardless of what you think of the prospects, and I really like Jermod McCoy and Avion Terrell. But that's still an unknown as to what that product will be in the NFL, what that player will be, if Jermod McCoy, for example, would be able to have that same success. So just taking the known commodity, like they did with Jalen Ramsey, like they did with Marcus Peters, and kind of got themselves to that first Super Bowl. Getting those guys is how you're going to fill the strength. And now, once again, you can Instead of picking for need, you can pick for whatever player Sean McVay likes the best. You can go and get Kenny and Sadiq. You can get Jermon McCoy and still put him on the outside, but we'll talk about why that might not be the Rams' plans with one of the moves that they made today. But it strengthens your weakest point on the team, your one really weak link. The one thing that got exposed in the playoffs was a secondary that wasn't bad, but certainly wasn't good enough to win a Super Bowl. And now you're giving yourselves a chance to have a secondary that is good enough to win a Super Bowl with a cornerback who has won a Super Bowl, a couple of them, in fact. So that's the good news for the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, for the Chiefs, it definitely hurts, and it's kind of interesting where the Chiefs are at now because, I mean, we saw it with L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, heck, we saw it with Marcus Peters when he went to, the Rams the first time, when the Chiefs traded him away the first time. They are kind of able to cycle in cornerbacks in and out, but at the same time, I don't think you can deny the type of skill that Trent McDuffie had was more transcendent than some of the other guys that Steve Spags puts up in there. And it seems like no matter who is in there, like Chamari Connor is able to have success and look good when he is being coached by Steve Spagnuolo, when he is, benefiting from the heavy blitz, aggressive defense that Kansas City likes to play and doesn't have to guard these receivers for very long, and just the techniques that Spags teaches and the match coverages that they like to run. They're able to usually mold whatever cornerbacks they have to be a pretty competent secondary. But at the same time, it's a big risk to give up one of your top playmakers and probably your top returning player based on age and position of value on the defensive side of the football. So I kind of have mixed feelings on it from a Chiefs perspective. But I do think with the amount of money that trade could open up, it wasn't a ton that it did because McDuffie was still on his rookie deal. And getting the first-round pick, it certainly gives the Chiefs a chance to build places which they are not as solid on. Because, like we said, you can put together you and me out there on the secondary for the Chiefs, and I think we would have success with Steve Spagnuolo coaching us. Obviously, a bit of hyperbole there, but I think most NFL players, most NFL cornerbacks have been able to find success when they've gone to the Kansas City Chiefs defense, and they've been able to play at a maximized level. That hasn't been the case for the offensive line. That hasn't been the case for the wide receivers, where in order for those roles to be dynamic, you have needed big-time players like Tyreek Hill or prime Travis Kelce, or the Orlando Brown, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Joe Tooney offensive line. Those have needed the pieces. The pieces that you're putting into the system are just as important as the system on the offensive line and wide receiver group. So now you can maybe focus on those and build that up with to be a strength for you and put somewhat elite talent at those positions, and then you're not shaving too much off of the secondary because of the trust that you have that it has a very high floor at the very least. It might not be as dynamic without McDuffie, but you're still not losing a ton, and you could be instead gaining a ton with the wide receivers and the offensive line. So I think all in all, I trend more positively for the Chiefs because they do get that number 29 pick. It's not like a huge first-round pick, but it's a second first-round pick nonetheless. But I think the clear winner right now of the trade, I would have to give it to the Los Angeles Rams, although I think both teams are, as I said, right now a net positive. And obviously it just all depends on what the Chiefs do with that pick and what the Chiefs do with the open cap space and how they fill those needs in the secondary. All right, into free agency we go. And it was busy, like we mentioned. Right away, the names went off the board just like that, one after another, after another, after another, and it really lasted all the way until we hit record on the podcast here tonight. And I've got a list of 7 winners and then 4 losers from just the first day of free agency. You can agree, you can disagree. These are just my takes on how I think the first day went for, I guess in this case, like a third of the league. So we'll go with winner number 1. And this is in no particular order. I'm not saying this winner is more or less than any of the other 7 winners, but just in the order that I had written down with the ones that came to mind when I was going through the team trackers for free agency. So the number 1, in name only, the Panthers are a winner. And that is because they addressed a big need of theirs, which was, okay, they finally got the run game kind of settled and figured out with Derek Brown, with A'Shawn Robinson, with Tershawn Wharton, all of those guys kind of manning the middle. But none of those guys can rush the passer particularly well. I mean, Derek Brown can, but it's just more difficult to rush the passer when the interior offensive line of your opponent can double team you every single snap and doesn't have to worry about Tershawn Wharton or A'Shawn Robinson getting into the backfield on passing plays. And even with the improved run defense, it wasn't as if the run defense was elite for Carolina. Much like most of the 2025 Carolina Panthers season, the run game or the run defense was up and down and was Jekyll and Hyde on a week-to-week basis. And you never would know which one would show up that day. But I think by and large, it was a much improved run defense, which I guess isn't that hard to do after finishing with one of the worst historical run defenses of all time in 2024. But they had addressed that last offseason. And they almost addressed the pass rush because they had Milton Williams for a split second in that 2025 free agency, and then he ended up going to the New England Patriots instead. But this season, they have addressed the pass rush, and that is by getting Jalen Phillips. And you can put him as an outside linebacker and have him rush the passer. And they drafted a number of pass rushers last year in day 2 and day 3 of the NFL draft. They got guys like Nick Scarton. And I'm going to butcher it, but Princely Umanumelen, I believe. But guys that can rush the passer and got better as the season went on, but now you compare them with a solid veteran, probably the best edge rusher. Well, I guess Trey Hendrickson, probably the best edge rusher that is on the market, but one of the best edge rushers on the market in free agency this year. So that's going to help your pass rush. That's going to take the load off of Derek Brown solely. It's also going to give Scarton and Umanumelen a lot more favorable matchups when they're on the field opposite of Jalen Phillips. And you're obviously banking on those two players to improve in their second year. That doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but I like that you have addressed the pass rush and also now have given yourself a solid man in the middle with Devin Lloyd, who had a phenomenal season for Jacksonville. I had him as my number 1 linebacker from the 2025 season. He had a number of interceptions, and it wasn't just him being in the right place at the right time. He was making the instinctual plays, like that one that he took for 99 yards against Kansas City, flooding the underneath route that Patrick Mahomes had almost pre-read before the snap, expecting Lloyd to blitz, and he didn't. And yeah, a lot of that scheme from Campanile, but also Devin Lloyd has to react correctly, has to execute the play, and he did. And then he took it for 99 yards for the touchdown. And that was the sort of play that you got from Devin Lloyd all season. And if that can continue to get even better, and I see no reason why it would not, with Ejiro Evero as one of the most underrated and unheralded defensive coordinators in the NFL, I think you have significantly improved your defense with those two moves. And you also bring in, you replace the old backup, old in both the former backup and also just an aged man in Andy Dalton. You replace him with Kenny Pickett. And, I would still want the stability of Andy Dalton if I were the Carolina Panthers, because I think he brings a little bit more to the table if Bryce Young does get injured at some point this season, or for whatever reason Bryce Young does fall off a cliff and goes back to where he was in the first couple of weeks of the 2024 season. But you at least get younger and you take some of the pressure, the looking over your shoulder off of the back of Bryce Young. He knows that he, no matter what, is going to start the 17 games in his fourth NFL season. He doesn't have to worry about being benched for Andy Dalton because, frankly, the player behind him on the depth chart is not threatening his starting job. It's not as if Andy Dalton were, but he was threatening as a bridge option if things had gotten so bad for Carolina in the 2024 season, even after Bryce Young had come back from his benching, and if he had not played well in that time instead of what happened in reality, which was he played pretty well at the end of the 2024 season after returning from being benched. But regardless, he can have the confidence and doesn't have to look over his shoulder. My next winner, more of a minor winner, but a winner nonetheless, and I think that is the Cincinnati Bengals. And we knew how much they needed to get better on defense. Kind of not only last year, but this year as well. And they had a lot of money to spend in free agency this year, and they spent it, which isn't something you often see from the Cincinnati Bengals. So it was good for them and their ownership and their general manager to kind of step out of that comfort zone of mostly paying high price contracts to your high-end players, your in-house high-end players, which they've done with guys like Joe Burrow and Higgins and Chase, obviously, over the last couple of years. But going outside of the organization to sign bigger contracts had been a bit more of a rarity. And they got Brian Cook, the safety from Kansas City, who at least PFF-wise had been one of the top-graded safeties in all of the NFL last year. And then Boye Mafe, who has been a very solid pass rusher for Seattle, never really became a starting pass rusher and was more of a rotational guy throughout his 4-year run with the Seahawks, but now he gets the opportunity to really have some runway with the Cincinnati Bengals on the opposite side of Shamar Stewart, who is dealing with injuries, replacing Shamar Stewart. So the Bengals on defense starting to solve some of those issues by getting solid players. Not over-the-top elite defenders, but guys that can hopefully elevate the floor for Cincinnati in a tough AFC South. And then the Kansas City Chiefs, I think this is a winner. I don't know if it was all because of the Trent McDuffie trade that they had a little bit more cap space. A lot of it had to do with the Patrick Mahomes restructuring of his contract. But regardless, they were able to make a splash today by at first getting the reigning Super Bowl MVP in Kenneth Walker, K9 as he's known, and a guy that brings a lot more explosiveness to the backfield than I think this team had the last couple of years. Like when you looked at what was going on in the running game on the field and then looked back to see, oh, this team has like a high success rate running the football, you would kind of scratch your head because Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are getting these quote-unquote successful run rates, but they're getting them consistently at like 4 yards, 5 yards a pop and never really getting explosive plays. And we've seen the NFL trend over the last decade and a half being that the stronger offensive teams have the most explosive plays. It doesn't matter if you are methodically moving the ball down the field, which might have been the case more in like the early 2000s. It matters if you can get those explosive plays. And Kenneth Walker is a guy that, yes, will choose the wrong hole oftentimes. Not oftentimes, but enough to make you notice it. But also with that risk comes great rewards and great big running plays. And we saw the Seahawks have success with that over the last few seasons since bringing him in. So that is a big move for Kansas City. You obviously want to pair him up with a guy like Pacheco or Hunt, both of whom I believe are free agents. And maybe they can bring one of those guys back. I think Pacheco still remains. I think they both remain unsigned. So you could have that power and shiftiness, the Sonic and Knuckles, so to speak, that Detroit used before they traded away David Montgomery, with the power guy, with the steady guy, and then with your home run hitter. And there's obviously still some other options out there as well. But not only did they get Kenneth Walker, They also bring back Travis Kelce. He'll be back, and he's not, obviously, we all know, he's not Travis Kelce of 2020 and 2021. He's not that guy anymore. His athleticism has lost a step, but he's still able to box guys out for catches. And in a perfect world where Patrick Mahomes' knee is all better by the time the regular season starts, and I mean, Rashee Rice seems like he's probably going to have to deal with another suspension. I don't know for sure yet, but we'll see. But in a perfect world where, a perfect world for the Chiefs at least, not for his victims, but a perfect world where Rashee Rice is able to play week one and Xavier Worthy is able to play week one and take a significant step, and bringing back Tyquan Thornton like they did today, it gives Travis Kelce a lot more of the isolated opportunities over the middle of the field that he had when Tyreek Hill was taking a lot of the attention off of him. And even if he's not going to be that explosive home run hitter, he's still going to be a reliable tight end that has fantastic chemistry with your MVP winning quarterback. So bringing him back was huge. Alohi Gilman replacing Brian Cook, essentially, I think is a bit of a step down. Not a major step down, but a noticeable one. But still is going to give you some good free safety play nonetheless, like he did with Baltimore after being traded from the Chargers. And then Kyrie's Tonga fits the Chiefs' mold for what they like on the defensive line, a good run stopper, a stout run stopper. He fits into what Spags likes to do with his defensive lineman not named Chris Jones, and just have them there to eat gaps and let the blitzers do the rest. And Kyrie's Tonga can do that for you. He's not going to be overly incredible this year for them, but he is going to be reliable in what he does, and that is stuffing stuff at the line of scrimmage and, being a double gap guy. So that is my third winner, is the Kansas City Chiefs. 3 of my winners are actually in the AFC West, and that includes this next one, which is the Las Vegas Raiders. And we knew the Raiders would have a lot of cap room. The question, I think, was, A, would they make the right choices? Because overwhelmingly in the recent history of the Las Vegas/Oakland Raiders, since the days of Rich Gannon and Jerry Rice, at least back in 2002, they have made poor decisions year in, year out in terms of what free agents they do bring in during the times where they have this vast amount of cap space. And B, is the culture so bad with the Raiders right now, firing 3 head coaches in the last 3 years, that would maybe turn some teams away or turn some players away from wanting to go to Vegas. But I think it didn't. I think the allure of the Raiders still there. I think the culture that they expect Clint Kubiak to create and that John Spytek and Tom Brady are building, and knowing the quarterback and the positivity and leadership that he brings, who that will be after watching him go on a national title run last January, they know that something is being built here, and they were willing to go to a team that has the number 1 overall pick in droves. And that includes one of the best prizes in this free agency cycle, and that being the center Tyler Linderbaum. Linderbaum signs a deal of 3 years, $81 million, of which $60+ million of that is guaranteed. That's an average annual value of $27 million per year. I believe the cap hit in this first year is going to be around 16.6666 repeating million dollars. But for an offensive line that was so putrid last year, one of the worst that we've seen, especially after Colton Miller's early injury, that gives you some sort of floor. And take some of the pressure off of Jackson Power Johnson. If he can go over to guard, where he's kind of gone between both center and guard just based on the need of the Raiders, and hasn't looked great at either position, but maybe now being placed next to Tyler Linderbaum has a chance to not be a bust. He was a guy that I really liked. Jackson Powers Johnson, coming out of that draft, was one of the top players on my board. He has not lived up to that just yet. Tyler Linderbaum, however, has. He is an above-average pass protector. He is an elite run blocker. And that's what you need for Ashton Jeanty. Everything this year for the Raiders is going to rely on what Ashton Jeanty and Fernando Mendoza can do. And Fernando Mendoza's job is going to be easier with the most, as the success for Ashton Jeanty goes up. If Ashton Jeanty has more success, it will become more feasible for Fernando Mendoza to have success. And Ashton Jeanty can have success with Tyler Linderbaum now blocking for him as the center. And it also gives Fernando Mendoza a good veteran center to kind of work through the protections with throughout the course of the season. And can kind of take that on his shoulders if Mendoza is not quite ready for that at the NFL level in terms of shifting protections based on what he sees out there. They also pair up a pair of national championship winning teammates with Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean, linebackers in the same second level of the 2022 Georgia Bulldog team that won it all. Both of those players have had their ups and downs since coming to the NFL, but both of them coming off probably their best seasons. I like that they're going to be able to play together, and I like that they're at least on the upward trajectory. Nakobe Dean especially. And I think Quay Walker has been kind of just peaks and valleys throughout the course of his career, and even last year peaks and valleys. But I still think he is trending upward, and I think giving him some comfort in playing with somebody that he spent his entire college career with is certainly going to help him take the next steps. They also get some athletic, solid edge rushers, guys that have proven to be somewhat good at the NFL level, but haven't, I think, fully grown into their athleticism to be the top potential players to put their have their skills reach their full potential. That would be Kwity Paye, and then bringing back Malcolm Kuntz. But if you believe that you have a defensive coordinator that can unlock that, if you believe that your defensive line coach and linebacker coaches are able to get the best out of those guys, and Kuntz we did see flashes of before his injury, but Paye, it's been a solid guy, but a guy that you know you can get more out of if everything goes right. So they got him. They get Jalen Naylor, a wide receiver, former Viking wide receiver. He's a solid player. I think he's gotten better each year that he's been in the league. He was drafted in 2022. Didn't see much playing time then. Didn't see much playing time in 23. Saw a lot more in 24 and then a lot more in 25 and got better each and every year. And I think is going to be a reliable option. I don't think he's a number one option, but he made a lot of these back shoulder catches that you saw Fernando Mendoza throwing to Elijah Surratt throughout the course of the 2025 college football season, and Charlie Becker. So he's used to that. I mean, that's what his go-to thing was from both Sam Darnold and from J.J. McCarthy, was those back shoulder balls, being able to warp his body in the right direction at the right time without tipping his hand to the defensive back and making those catches. And that has been Fernando Mendoza's best throw, at least while he was at Indiana. So you've already got a plethora of options, and based on over the caps numbers, they still have a lot of cap space and can still do some damage on Tuesday and Wednesday. And I mean, as free agency goes on all the way up until the start of the regular season. And they're building a foundation for their guy, for Fernando Mendoza to step into and have a better chance for success. And I think that is the first time we can say that with the Raiders in quite some time. Moving on to our fifth, or our fifth team, yes. Our fifth winner is the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I think they have made this offense a lot better today. I think bringing in Michael Pittman and bringing in Rico Dowdle to be options, and Pittman was a trade from Indianapolis after they signed Alec Pierce. But being able to get those guys, Dowdle, who looked really explosive at times for the Carolina Panthers and had been good with Dallas as their top guy in the backfield during the 2024 season. I think he can do it with the Steelers and be, I like Kenneth Gainwell, but be a better option even than Kenneth Gainwell to pair with Jaylen Warren. And whether that's Aaron Rodgers that steps into the quarterback role once again, whether that's Mason Rudolph, whether that is Kyler Murray or a third-round draft pick, go and get Garrett Nussmeier or Ty Simpson in the second or first round. Whoever it is going to have more weapons than Aaron Rodgers had during the 2025 season. So I think you're on the right trajectory there because while the defense is still aging each and every year, they still have been effective through that aging process. Obviously, you'd expect it at some point to maybe fall off a cliff, but it hasn't happened yet. Then the Tennessee Titans, another team that had a ton of cap space. They bring in Alontae Taylor. They bring in John Franklin Myers. They bring in Cordell Flott. They bring in Wan'Dale Robinson. So you've got your nickel corner that can blitz in Alontae Taylor. You've got, you hope, an outside corner that had a breakout year in Cordell Flott. Had a breakout year with New York. You'll see if you can get that out of him here with the Titans. It's Robert Saleh. I expect him to have a pretty good gauge on the defensive talent of these guys. And Robert Saleh is a guy that no matter where he goes, no matter who he has, whether everyone's injured or not, see San Francisco this past season, he's able to make the most out of a messy roster situation on the defensive side of the football. And now you're bringing in some better pieces for him. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, he gets to pair back up with Brian Daboll, the offensive coordinator of Tennessee, and give an underneath option for Cam Ward in between, kind of as a reprieve between some of these big-time throws that he's going to attempt to make. You have a solid security blanket there. Again, much like the Raiders, not moves that are going to win you a Super Bowl championship this year, but the right guys that will fit within this system that you hope to bring you success within that system and can make your, in this case, sophomore quarterback more comfortable and give him the chance to find more success. And then the final winner I have is the Los Angeles Chargers. And they didn't make any home run moves. And because of that, they still have a lot of cap space to make home run moves on day two. But what they did is they established what their identity is going to be early in this offseason. They already did that by bringing in Mike McDaniel and bringing in Mike McDaniel's offensive line coach from Miami and the run game coordinator from Miami. And it looks like Mike McDaniel and this Chargers offense is going to take a significant step towards running the ball, maybe even more than they did with Greg Roman. And the problem with Greg Roman wasn't that necessarily he ran the ball a ton. It was that his runs weren't very creative. They didn't have a lot of window dressing, and they weren't able to trick linebackers' eyes all that much. And also, you didn't really have a dynamic running back like Kamani Vidal. Solid guy. Amarian Hampton was injured. Najee Harris, solid, but didn't have the guy that could really be a true bell cow. And you probably have that in Amarian Hampton in his second year if he can stay healthy, but you now have some infrastructure similar to the infrastructure that Mike McDaniel had while he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and that's Tyler Biadasz now. He obviously wasn't with Miami, but he is an above-average center and is a better option than what they had at center last year. They also bring in Cole Strange, who was with Mike McDaniel and hasn't had the best career, but knows the system, knows the angles. And it's a tricky system. It's a complicated, complex system of outside zone and pin and pull. They use it all. They use a full package with full motions to throw defenses off as much as possible. But Cole Strange is a guy that knows how to do that because he has been with Mike McDaniel. And probably the best blocking tight end that was on the market is Charlie Kolar. So you have him there helping pave those holes as well. And then Alec Ingold, who was released by Miami earlier in the week. Mike McDaniel quickly scoops him up and says, "Thank you very much." He was a huge part of the lead blocking or back-end wham blocking that Miami had and was able to find so much success. So they are establishing themselves to be this pound and ground team and make Justin Herbert's job as easy as possible. Like, just think for a second. Tua Tagovailoa, we know what he is as a quarterback. And we saw him put up video game numbers for parts of the 2022 and 2023 seasons when he wasn't being concussed. We saw that. We know that he doesn't have the best arm. We know that he throws with anticipation but doesn't always make the correct reads. But he was still in that offense, getting the ball out to the right place quickly, accurately, all the time. And Mike McDaniel was able to maximize that to the point where he looked like a top quarterback, or at least put up passer ratings that were in the top 3 of the NFL in both of those years. And now you're bringing that same offense in with a quarterback that has the elite arm talent and that has proven it with no matter what offensive system he has been a part of in Justin Herbert. I think this Chargers offense has the chance to be very special. And now Mike McDaniel told Jim Harbaugh, these are the guys that I want to make the system work. And if the system works, then Justin Herbert can put up numbers that would dwarf even those that Tua was able to put up during his peak years with Mike McDaniel. And I think that is something to be excited about if you are a Los Angeles Chargers fan. Still, a lot has to go right, but the pieces are falling in for what Mike McDaniel wants to do. So those are the 7 winners: the Panthers, the Bengals, the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Steelers, the Titans, and the Chargers. I have 4 losers as well, and we'll go from the top, the New York Jets. The New York Jets seemed to be paying top dollar for second and third tier free agents, whereas the Raiders were spending a lot of money on Tyler Linderbaum and Nakobe Dean, some guys that have these high ceilings. It was more high floor, low ceiling guys or older guys for the New York Jets, a team that really needs to do a lot of winning if Aaron Glenn wants to keep his job. You've got Joseph Asai, a good player, a young player, not a great player, not in next level player. Minkah Fitzpatrick, still pretty good for a safety, not what he was. Kingsley Enagbare, one of my Packers fans, said that he hardly played. I don't know how reliable that is, but for the Packers, he rarely played and didn't make much of an impact. David Onyemata, again, solid defensive tackle, nothing out of this world. Dane Belton, sneaky, decent safety, not a game changer. And Demario Davis, who is on the downward arc of his career. So a ton of players on defense for the New York Jets and Aaron Glenn that he hopes is going to elevate their floor enough. And for a lot of teams that have good offenses, that would be fine. Those would be moves that work. But for the New York Jets, and at least where their offense currently sits, where Justin Fields is going to be your quarterback again next season, and obviously things could change tomorrow. Things could be changing as I'm recording this, or could have changed during the recording of this. But pre-recording this, Justin Fields is the quarterback with Tyrod Taylor as your backup. And there's even rumors that, maybe Carson Wentz will be the starting quarterback. This is not an offense that is going to be able to survive with a low ceiling defense, which I think this is based on the personnel that the Jets have brought in. Now, maybe you add some more dynamic playmakers and you give your offense the high ceiling, then it starts to work. But right now, if this is going to be, by and large, the roster that the New York Jets put in place for the 2026 season, I think it will be the last season of Aaron Glenn leading the New York Jets. Because I don't think these guys have the talent to take the Jets defense to the level that it needs to be at in order to make this team competent with the offense that it currently has. The Houston Texans made some good moves, but they're another one of my losers because their biggest need both this year and last year has been the offensive line, specifically pass protecting on the offensive line. Ed Ingram, good run blocker. Terrible pass protector. And really has only had one good season of run blocking. less last year with Houston. You're banking on that being the norm. But even with that, it was a fourth straight year of not being a good enough NFL caliber pass protector. You give away Juice Scruggs, that's not the hugest loss. You give away Tyus Howard, that's not the biggest loss either. But you're, at least at this point, still going to rely on an offensive line that has gotten C.J. Stroud killed over the last 2 years and still have not addressed that. And maybe they address that in the draft, but as of right now, the Texans would be my losers because if you put C.J. Stroud behind that offensive line again, I think you're going to have the similar disastrous results that we saw during the playoff run throughout a larger chunk of the season in 2026. Green Bay Packers, another one of my losers, and obviously wearing a Vikings shirt that probably falls on deaf ears for those that would say, oh, probably just being a little bit biased there. And maybe so, but at the same time, I really liked Elgton Jenkins, and I think choosing Sean Rhyan over Elgton Jenkins is a mistake. They re-signed Sean Rhyan to a 3-year extension, and then they released Elgton Jenkins unceremoniously. And if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I want Elgton Jenkins immediately. And they brought in a linebacker, but they brought in a linebacker that ranked as number 87 out of 88 for PFF, whatever that's worth, and is also on the downward side of his career. And now you don't have Jeff Hafley there as your linebacker guru, because he's now in Miami, to work with and make those guys better. So, I mean, you do have Jonathan Gannon, who I do like as a defensive coordinator, so maybe he can help Zaire Franklin find the next gear at this stage of his career, but I still have my doubts about that as of right now. But it is Zaire Franklin, a guy that has been a solid linebacker. Maybe they can get him up to form. But right now, I think that is going to be a blatantly obvious weakness in the Packers defense next year. And other than that, no other moves for the Packers. And then the Arizona Cardinals are my other loser because we all expected them to have Malik Willis as their quarterback when free agency opened. And as we'll talk about in a moment, Malik Willis did not choose the Arizona Cardinals. I thought it was going to be a shoo-in with Mike LaFleur there, with Monty Ossenfort, who drafted him in Tennessee there, or who was a part of the front office that drafted him. They don't get him. They don't get what was widely rumored to be their second option in Jimmy Garoppolo after talks kind of fell apart. Mike LaFleur wanting the guy that he had as Matthew Stafford's backup when he was with Sean McVay in Los Angeles last year and the year before that. But Jimmy G, things fall through, and instead they bring in Gardner Minshew, which is kind of like a shrug of your shoulders, and it's like, okay, Minshew is never going to be the guy to put you over the top, but he could, just like Jacoby Brissett, accidentally win you some games that you need to lose late in the season in order to get the top draft pick. And I don't even know if the Arizona Cardinals would even have a chance. Like if Arch Manning is that top draft pick, we know what the Manning family has done to make sure that Eli Manning has not gone to bad situations like the Chargers. They would probably be willing to take part in some of that chicanery to keep Arch Manning from going to the Cardinals, which are kind of a clown organization, clown ownership at this point. Maybe they get a new owner, but the Bidwells have run that franchise since I think since they were the Chicago Cardinals. I believe a Bidwell family member has been a part of that ownership group. So the Cardinals not getting the quarterback makes them a loser. Having to settle for Gardner Minshew and Jacoby Brissett going into next season makes them a loser. And then also bringing in two kind of redundant running backs with Tyler Algier and James Conner. They re-sign James Conner. They bring in Tyler Algier. I would have liked if one of these guys came in, but they're sort of the same player, just one is younger. So why not cut ties with the second one? Because I think at this point now, that probably is the Cardinals signaling that they're not going to be interested in a running back at pick 3 in this upcoming draft. That running back would be Jeremiah Love, who I think is better than Ashton Genty. I think probably over the last decade, unless I'm forgetting anybody, Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson would be the only guys that I would put over him as a prospect. And I think you are signaling to the world and signaling to yourselves that you're going to rely on the veterans and you're going to forego getting what I think is a very, very strong elite talent at the running back position. So that is kind of more of a subjective on me. This is why I think it's a loss, because I think you are now kind of making yourself not pick Jeremiah Love in this 2026 draft, which going into free agency, I thought the Cardinals are probably going to be the team that gets him. So that is the winner and losers of free agency. Let's quickly go through some of the other signings from today that I didn't give as a big-time winner or loser. Malik Willis, he goes to Miami. He stays with the parts of the Green Bay front office and Green Bay coaching staff that he was a part of over the last 2 seasons. And I'm surprised that he went to Miami, because I don't know, with the release of Tua Tagovailoa with a pre-June 1st cut, I believe it was a $99 million, something like that, cap hit. Like if it was a post-June 1 cut, I don't know if you can designate something as a post-June 1 cut and have that cut before June 1st. I don't know how all of that language works. But based on my understanding, it is a $97 million dead cap hit for the Tua Tagovailoa release. So I don't know exactly where all the money is coming from. The good news is it's just this 1 year, and then you're off the Tua contract forever, but it's a hefty year. So maybe they're just kind of backloading the cap hits for Malik Willis and into the second and third year, but they do get a quarterback that was kind of looked at as the prized possession of the offseason in Malik Willis. So I would give Miami a win there, but I think I'm also going to wait to see if the SEC investigates. But for right now, Malik Willis, I think, is going to at least make this team fun to watch, because we're all going to be interested to see if the 35 dropbacks he had in Green Bay this year can translate to full season success. And then with Tua being released, he goes to Atlanta with not Kirk Cousins. He's gone. With Michael Penix. So 2 left-handers there. And he will probably, if Michael Penix is not ready to go to start the season, he will probably be the guy that starts week 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe for the Atlanta Falcons. And as Penix kind of begins to work his way back in. Alec Pierce. This is one that you love to see. Alec Pierce stays with the Indianapolis Colts, and with Daniel Jones being there on the transition tag, I think we saw that Daniel Jones really liked throwing the football deep down the field to Alec Pierce. Anthony Richardson liked throwing the football deep down the field to Alec Pierce, because there was this inherent faith that you had in him that if it was close to him, he would be able to catch the football, because he is just that good of a contested catch player and positions his body really, really well to get those contested catches, and has become better as a route runner. But he sticks with the Colts. That is what gave them the confidence or the flexibility to move Michael Pittman in a trade to the Pittsburgh Steelers, because now it's going to be Alec Pierce and Josh Downs and Tyler Warren and Jonathan Taylor. The weapons are still there for whenever it is Daniel Jones does return from the torn Achilles. And he has Alec Pierce as kind of like the anti-security. He's a security blanket, but usually when you think of a security blanket, it's an underneath player. Alec Pierce is the deep down the field security blanket where you just kind of trust him to catch the football. And then we also have Jalen Watson going to the Rams. So that is the other Kansas City Chiefs cornerback going to the Rams. They brought in Trent McDuffie in the trade, and then they bring in Jalen Watson as a free agent. So AFC Championship winning defensive backfield is now with a team that was in the NFC Championship last year, with their only question mark being that defensive secondary. And suddenly the Rams look like they are one of the favorites, at least right now, heading into the 2026 season for the NFC title. They are, they already were. This just obviously, these last couple of moves heavily strengthened that case. Travis Etienne to the New Orleans Saints, kind of pointing to the end of the Alvin Kamara era, which started to happen at the beginning of last season, if we're being honest. But I think it is the first time going into a season where we expect it to not be Alvin Kamara as the major guy for the New Orleans Saints, because I think even with Kamara quickly fading in the early parts of the 2025 season, at least during training camp and going into the 2025 season, we just assumed it would be Alvin Kamara being the top guy in the backfield as always. But now it's going to be Travis Etienne, we assume. I still wouldn't rule out the Saints as a Jeremiah Love team, because that could be interesting to pair up Jeremiah Love and Travis Etienne. We'll see if he even makes it to pick 8. Then Mike Evans, the big one, going to the San Francisco 49ers. He leaves the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and gets a big deal with San Francisco. And he is going to be that deep down the field security blanket and contested catch guy, albeit a bit older one, now for Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy hasn't really had a weapon like that where his accuracy doesn't necessarily matter as much when you're throwing it to that guy. The ball placement at least doesn't matter as much. So I really like that move for the San Francisco 49ers, and they still have cap space to get a guy that I think they should. And I will mention him in just a second. And then Odafe Owe, one of the, I think the big 3 pass rushers were Hendrickson, Phillips, and Odafe Owe heading into this free agency period. And he goes to the Commanders. I think it's a 4-year, $100 million deal. It's a big contract for Owe, but he had a double-digit sack season for the Chargers. He was traded for Alohi Gilman in the middle of last season, but played for both the Ravens and Chargers last year. And that is going to obviously help Washington, who I think is kind of reading the cards and saying that at pick 7, they might not have a chance to draft one of those top 3 edge rushers right now. The consensus top 3, I think, are Arvell Reese, who is a linebacker, but a lot of people are projecting him to play edge, David Bailey, and then Reuben Bain Jr. Those guys are probably going to be gone by the time it gets to pick number 7 with Washington. So you are at least giving yourselves a parachute to use here with the Odafe Owe, so that if one of those edge rushers is not there, which we expect, you still have made a splash at that position during the offseason. So that is where Washington is at. All right, let's quickly look ahead to see who the free agents are heading into day 2. Their best remaining guys, Kyler Murray, the quarterback. I think we all expect him to go to Minnesota. At least that's where the vast majority of the reporting has been, that he will be a Minnesota Viking. We'll see if that's a smokescreen or if that does end up happening, which I think I expect at this point that it will, and that it's just a matter of time. I know he can't officially be released before Wednesday at, I think it's 4 Eastern. So maybe that's playing into it, but then why wouldn't Tua also not be able to be I don't know. I don't know how that all works. Trey Hendrickson, the top defensive player available. I would like him as a fit with San Francisco. If you pair him up with Nick Bosa, with Fred Warner in the backfield, in the second level of the defense, I think you've got like a nice little triangle of power there with those 3 players. And Trey Hendrickson or Nick Bosa is going to have a 2-way go on every single pass rush snap. So that is going to be huge. And if you can spread those 2-way goes out, it gives them, and a 2-way go is when you have a lot of, when you're on the defensive line or when you're rushing the passer, most players are assigned to only go through one gap between guard or center, or guard and tackle. And then 1, maybe 2 players have 2-way goes where they can go to either side of the player that they are attacking. So if they're going to the left tackle, they have the option to take the outside shoulder of the left tackle or take the inside shoulder, because that gap is not going to be occupied by any of that edge rusher's teammates. So if you're going to have Trey Hendrickson and Nick Bosa with 2-way goes, one of them at least on every single play, I think it's going to make it tough for opposing offenses. And then Mykel Williams also. You can kind of move him around a little bit. He was a guy that was great against the run in college and looked good before he was injured with that San Francisco defense last year. Rasheed Walker, Cleveland is the one that needs just a ton of offensive linemen right now, because every single one of their starting offensive linemen went into free agency, and they've gotten a couple of guys, but they still don't have a full offensive line. So Rasheed Walker, he's the best remaining offensive tackle. Cleveland has some room to afford that contract, and maybe he goes there. Romeo Doubs seems like a New York Jet to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm just, being lazy with the Aaron Rodgers went to New York. So now that another Green Bay Packer player has to go to New York. But I have Romeo Doubs choosing the New York Jets and being a nice compliment to Garrett Wilson along with Adonai Mitchell. I don't have a ton of faith in Adonai Mitchell, and I really like what Romeo Doubs can do. I think whether it's Justin Fields, whether it's Tyrod Taylor, whether it's Kyler Murray, whoever it is that's your quarterback next year for the New York Jets, I think it gives you a pretty solid 1, 2, and I guess 3 receiver with A.D. Mitchell. K'Lavon Chaisson, I think he goes to Tampa Bay. They made some moves today, but could also use a decent linebacker, edge rusher hybrid that K'Lavon Chaisson was. They've been looking to get consistent outside pressure, and he could fill that role. Caden Ellis, the linebacker that was from Atlanta, I have him going to Washington. This is mostly because the Durante Jones is a disciple of Brian Flores, who loves to use the blitzing linebackers, and in fact kept one of his blitzing linebackers, Eric Wilson, this last season because of how good he was used, and is going to be an integral part of the Minnesota Vikings defense moving forward in 2026. I think that Caden Ellis can be that guy for the student of Brian Flores and Durante Jones, who is the defensive coordinator of Washington now. Chigakonkwo, I also have going to Washington as kind of a solid weapon, maybe as a guy that can't replace Zach Ertz, but can at least be a capable offensive player. I have Reek Woolen, a man coverage corner, going to a guy that loves to run man coverage with Aaron Glenn and the New York Jets, because the Jets still have some money. Leo Chenal, the linebacker from Kansas City, I have him going to Indianapolis. They moved on from Zaire Franklin. It seems like they have an opening to fill with a younger linebacker, and Leo Chenal could be that guy. Nick Cross, the former Colts safety, I have him going to Arizona as the Jalen Thompson replacement. Thompson, the safety that went and signed a deal with Dallas today. So Nick Cross comes in. He can both be the Thompson replacement and the heir apparent to Budda Baker, and puts him in a good spot. Elton Jenkins, I have him going to the Vikings because they need a center, and I'm biased. And there is a track record of Packers players going to Minnesota as soon as they are released, maybe in revenge, I don't know, but I think Elton Jenkins would be a very good choice for Minnesota, and they are one of the most center needy teams at this point of the offseason, and he is the best available center. So it's not just because of the bias. There's also some analysis that goes into that. Deebo Samuel, I have him going to Denver. Seems like a perfect Sean Payton toy. I have DJ Reader, the defensive tackle, re-signing with Cincinnati. Jawan Jennings, the wide receiver, going to Tennessee. I think you already have, though. I think the presumption is right. The assumption right now is that Calvin Ridley will not be back with the Tennessee Titans. So maybe Jawan Jennings, if Calvin Ridley is back, it becomes a redundancy. But they have, Alik Ayomaner, and they have Wan'Dale Robinson, and you can now put in Jawan Jennings as a number one guy that can be that X wide receiver for you, and all of a sudden you have some decent weapons for Cam Ward. Joey Bosa, I have him going to the Kansas City Chiefs. Aaron Rodgers going back to Pittsburgh or retiring, obviously. And then Calais Campbell, I think he would fit in on that very good defensive line of the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks also have a lot of cap space to work with. They could be a win or two because they retain most of their players outside of like Kobe Bryant that were and Kenneth Walker, obviously, that were hitting free agency. They brought back Josh Jobe. They brought back Rashid Shaheed. So I think they can make themselves more of a winner by bringing in Calais Campbell to be a part of that just big-time rotationary defensive line that had so much success during their Super Bowl season. Well, that's all I have for you for free agency. Obviously, a fun first day. We'll be back tomorrow kind of going through some of the day 2 winners and losers. We won't let our day 1 winners and losers. It'll be just isolated to day 2. So if you were a loser on day 1, you have a clean slate. As we head into day 2 of the free agency period, we'll have it for you. I'll record it tomorrow night after I get back from work, and we'll have it up by Wednesday morning on the Grey Duck Sports Facebook page. Go ahead and give us a follow, by the way, at the, I might have said Facebook, YouTube. Sorry, the Grey Duck Sports YouTube page. Follow us on Twitter at Grey Duck Sports. No periods, no spaces there. To find out when all of our shows will be, we not only have the Grey Duck NFL show here on the Grey Duck Sports Network, but we also have the Vibe at the Vikings and Twinkie Town Tavern, and we are looking to continue to expand in this ever-evolving world of sports media and sports podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow with some more winners and losers. This has been another big edition of the Grey Duck NFL show.